The life of Ulysses S. Grant represents one of the most profound, paradoxical, and deeply compelling trajectories in American history. Ascending from the depths of civilian poverty and relentless failure to the zenith of military and political power, Grant's narrative defies the conventional archetype of the innate, polished genius. The man who would command the vast armies of the United States was born Hiram Ulysses Grant on April 27, 1822, in Point Pleasant, Ohio. His parents provided a financially stable but demanding Midwestern household supported by a tannery, a prosperous but gruesome business that required processing animal carcasses in kettles of stinging, putrid chemicals. Young Hiram detested the stench and the macabre nature of the tannery, swearing to his father that he would never work in the trade. Instead, Grant found solace and an extraordinary natural aptitude in the stables. He demonstrated an uncanny, almost preternatural ability to tame and ride the most unruly horses, and by the age of 11, he was performing all the farm labor that required draft animals. Despite his industriousness, Grant was a small, sensitive, and quiet youth whose introversion was cruelly mistaken for a lack of intelligence by local children, who nicknamed him useless. Recognizing his son was entirely unfit for the cutthroat world of mid-19th century business, Jesse Grant applied for an appointment to the United States Military Academy at West Point on Hiram's behalf, without the boy's knowledge. Grant's arrival in 1839 was marked by a clerical error that permanently altered his identity. His nominating congressman erroneously wrote Ulysses S. Grant on the application, mistakenly assuming Ulysses was his first name and inserting his mother's maiden name, Simpson, as a middle initial. The War Department bureaucracy was rigid, forcing Grant to either accept the name or return home and reapply the following year. Preferring to avoid the delay, he accepted the change. Hiram Ulysses vanished, and Ulysses S. Grant, affectionately dubbed Sam by classmates as a play on Uncle Sam, was born. Academically, Grant was an unexceptional cadet, graduating 21st in a class of 39 in 1843, and was assigned to Jefferson Barracks in Missouri. There, he met and quickly fell in love with Julia Dent. Their 1844 engagement was followed by Grant's deployment to Louisiana and Texas in preparation for the escalating conflict with Mexico. The Mexican-American War of 1846 served as a profound tactical and logistical classroom. Assigned as a regimental quartermaster, Grant was responsible for the unglamorous but critical task of managing supply lines, an apprenticeship that would later form the backbone of his operational genius during the Civil War. He demonstrated remarkable bravery under fire at Resaca de la Palma, Monterrey, and Chapultepec, earning 2 brevet promotions. Yet the war troubled Grant's moral compass. He viewed it as an imperialistic land grab designed to expand slaveholding territories, later calling it one of the most unjust wars ever waged by a stronger nation against a weaker one. Returning a seasoned veteran, Grant married Julia Dent in August 1848, but reassignment to distant outposts in the Pacific Northwest forced him to leave a pregnant Julia and his young son behind. The isolation plunged him into a deep depression, and to cope with his loneliness, the crushing boredom of peacetime garrison life, and incapacitating migraine headaches, Grant began to drink to excess. Facing the looming threat of a court-martial, he abruptly resigned his commission in April 1854, entering a 7-year nadir defined by grinding poverty and civilian failure. He attempted to farm a plot of land in Missouri, building a modest log cabin, but the farm failed to yield a living despite his backbreaking physical labor. He subsequently failed as a real estate partner, finding himself unsuited to aggressive debt collection, and desperate to feed his family, resorted to selling firewood on the street corners of St. Louis. Yet amid this crushing poverty, Grant demonstrated profound moral integrity. In 1858, he had acquired an enslaved man named William Jones from his father-in-law. Though virtually destitute and capable of selling the man for at least $1,000, a considerable amount at the time, Grant filed a deed of manumission in March 1859, legally freeing him. While not a radical abolitionist, his human decency precluded him from profiting from human bondage. By 1860, utterly defeated, a humbled Grant moved his family to Galena, Illinois, taking a subservient position as a clerk in his younger brother's leather goods shop. The outbreak of the American Civil War suddenly transformed Grant from a failed clerk into a highly valuable commodity due to his West Point education and combat experience. Sponsored by a local congressman, Grant helped recruit volunteers and was appointed by the Illinois governor to command the rebellious 21st Illinois Volunteer Infantry Regiment in June 1861. The disciplined military drill he imposed quickly tamed the regiment and turned it into an effective fighting force. Promoted to Brigadier General of Volunteers shortly after, he seized the operational initiative in the Western Theater. When Confederate forces violated Kentucky's neutrality, Grant instantly occupied Paducah without waiting for bureaucratic approval, securing the critical mouth of the Tennessee River. Following a daring amphibious raid at Belmont, Grant's ascent to national prominence occurred in early 1862 during the brilliant campaign against Forts Henry and Donelson. Utilizing naval ironclads and gunboats, he forced the capitulation of Fort Henry, then marched overland through brutal winter weather to lay siege to the stronger Fort Donelson. When the Confederate commander requested terms of capitulation, Grant electrified the Northern public with his reply, "No terms except an unconditional and immediate surrender can be accepted." The capture resulted in the surrender of an entire 15,000-man Confederate army, making U.S. Grant a national hero instantly dubbed Unconditional Surrender Grant, and earning him a promotion to Major General. The brutal reality of total war caught up with Grant at the Battle of Shiloh in April 1862. A massive Confederate surprise attack drove his unfortified Union forces back in a horrific day of slaughter, yet Grant refused to retreat. Reinforced the next day by Don Carlos Buell's army, he launched a relentless counterattack that drove the Confederates from the field. The victory was costly, 13,000 Union casualties, and it tarnished his reputation, giving his jealous superior, General Henry Halleck, the pretext to temporarily remove him from field command. However, as Lincoln churned through commanders in the Eastern Theater, a broader bureaucratic reorganization elevated Halleck to General-in-Chief. With Halleck now in Washington, Grant was restored to active command in the West. If Shiloh was a lesson in resilience, the 1863 Vicksburg Campaign became the ultimate demonstration of Grant's strategic vision. Taking the heavily fortified city of Vicksburg was essential to severing the Confederacy in two. Grant devised a spectacularly audacious plan, marching infantry south through Louisiana swamps while naval gunboats ran past Vicksburg's water batteries under cover of night. Transporting 37,000 soldiers across the Mississippi River without a casualty, Grant made a decision that terrified his subordinates. He completely severed his own supply lines. In a brilliant 20-day blitzkrieg, he drove northeast to neutralize a Confederate relief force in Jackson, then pivoted west, driving the main Confederate army back into Vicksburg's defensive trenches. Grant settled into a relentless 47-day siege, bombarding the defenders until a starving, exhausted Confederate army surrendered the city on July 4, 1863, an undeniable turning point of the war. Recognizing his aggressive spirit, President Lincoln promoted Grant to lieutenant general, giving him command of all United States armies, the first officer to hold the active rank since George Washington. Grant implemented a coordinated continental strategy to apply relentless pressure across the entire map, focusing not on capturing Richmond, but on the total destruction of Robert E. Lee's army. The campaign began in the dense wilderness, where intense fighting sparked horrifying wildfires. Despite catastrophic losses that would traditionally dictate a retreat, Grant ordered his army to march south, relentlessly turning Lee's flank. Following the bloody clashes of Spotsylvania and Cold Harbor, Grant initiated a grinding 9-month siege at Petersburg, decimating Confederate logistics. Breaking the lines in April 1865, Grant pursued Lee to Appomattox Court House, where Lee finally surrendered. Dictating merciful terms, Grant paroled the soldiers and allowed them to keep their privately owned horses for spring planting, effectively preventing a protracted guerrilla war and setting the stage for reconciliation. In the volatile aftermath of Lincoln's assassination, Grant served as a stabilizing force. He initially attempted to work with President Andrew Johnson, but Grant's optimism evaporated as white Southerners enacted oppressive black codes, and racist paramilitary violence swept the region. Fighting Johnson's efforts to undermine congressional Reconstruction, Grant sided with radical Republicans, propelling him to a decisive presidential victory in 1868 with a mandate to heal the nation. Historians now recognize Grant as a pioneering civil rights president who aggressively utilized federal executive power to protect marginalized populations. He vigorously championed the 15th Amendment to secure black suffrage. When the Ku Klux Klan waged campaigns of domestic terrorism, Grant successfully lobbied for the unprecedented Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871. He established the Department of Justice, suspended habeas corpus in volatile counties, and deployed federal troops to crush the Klan, marking the most significant federal defense of African American civil rights until the mid-20th century. Grant also attempted a radical peace policy for Native Americans, seeking assimilation and protection over military subjugation. He replaced corrupt agents with Christian missionaries, though the policy ultimately unraveled due to relentless westward expansion, gold discoveries, and systemic racism, tragically resuming the Indian Wars. Despite his unimpeachable personal honesty, Grant's presidency was severely tarnished by systemic administrative corruption. His greatest weakness was a military mindset that valued extreme personal loyalty, making him pathologically trusting of those presenting themselves as friends. This blind spot allowed devastating scandals to fester, including the Black Friday gold market conspiracy and the Whiskey Ring of 1875, where corrupt officials systematically evaded millions in federal taxes. When the investigation encircled his personal secretary, Grant provided a sworn deposition guaranteeing his acquittal. Compounding the damage was the Panic of 1873, a severe global economic depression sparked by the overexpansion of railroads and the collapse of major banking houses. Congress passed an inflation bill in 1874 to inject $400 million in paper greenbacks into the economy to stimulate growth. Despite initial support, Grant, a staunch fiscal conservative who believed paper money must be backed by specie, deliberated and ultimately vetoed the bill. His decision stabilized the nation's long-term credit, but it caused immense short-term political backlash. The final major test of Grant's presidency came with the fiercely disputed election of 1876, which pushed the nation to the brink of crisis. Demonstrating steady statesmanship, Grant strengthened federal garrisons to deter violence while publicly signaling his commitment to a peaceful, lawful resolution. The standoff ultimately ended with the Compromise of 1877, which awarded the presidency to Rutherford B. Hayes in exchange for promises of internal improvements in the South and the withdrawal of the remaining federal troops, formally ending the era of Reconstruction. This averted a potential second civil war, but carried a devastating price. The collapse of Republican state governments in the South cleared the way for home rule, meaning the restoration of white Democratic control. Southern Democrats quickly moved to disenfranchise black voters, impose segregation, and use violence and intimidation to entrench white supremacy, opening the door to nearly a century of Jim Crow rule. Exhausted, Grant left the White House in 1877 and embarked on an unprecedented 2.5-year diplomatic world tour. Greeted across the globe as the military savior of the American Republic, he was the most famous American in the world, meeting with figures like Queen Victoria and Emperor Meiji. Returning at the height of renewed popularity, a failed third-term presidential bid led to his retirement in New York. Tragically, Grant invested his entire life savings into a brokerage firm, co-owned by his son and Ferdinand Ward, a financier operating a massive Ponzi scheme. The firm collapsed in 1884, leaving Grant utterly penniless and deeply humiliated. Simultaneously, Grant was diagnosed with advanced terminal throat cancer, the result of his lifelong cigar habit. Determined not to leave his beloved Julia in destitution, he embarked on his final heroic campaign by agreeing to write his memoirs. Mark Twain intervened against an exploitative publishing contract, offering Grant an unprecedented 70% of the net profits through his own publishing house. Relocated to Mount McGregor, Grant waged a daily war against torturous physical agony. Despite excruciating pain that made speaking nearly impossible, he wrote with stubby pencils for hours at a time, wrapped in heavy blankets, producing a sober, generous, and highly analytical account laced with dry humor. On July 20th, 1885, Grant laid down his pencil. 3 days later, he passed away at the age of 63. His personal memoirs became a monumental critical and commercial triumph, outselling every nonfiction book of the century. Generating a staggering $450,000 in royalties, the work secured Julia's financial independence and remains regarded as the finest military autobiography since Julius Caesar's Commentaries. Grant's funeral in New York City was attended by an estimated 1.5 million people, and he was eventually interred in Grant's tomb, the largest mausoleum in North America. Though for nearly a century, his reputation suffered under the weight of lost cause ideology. a historic revisionism trend in the South that sought to rewrite the story of the Civil War from an idealized Southern perspective. Modern historiography has decisively dismantled these myths, recognizing Grant as a visionary operational artist and a protector of civil rights against domestic terrorism. Thanks for watching. If you liked following Ulysses S. Grant's journey from a struggling clerk to the commander who saved the Union, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments whose life I should draw next. See you in the next one.